This is something that almost everyone does, whether you have ADHD or not. We all play the what if game with things that happen or that we wish happened or that we wish will happen. We ask ourselves things like, what if I had gotten that promotion? Or what if I had stayed with that person? What if the opposite? What if I left when I first wanted to before I got stuck? And we never really stop to ask, what if we don't actually like the result? I'm Aaron.
I'm Cass.
And this is Fuck the Plan, the ADHD Project podcast. And I really wanted to talk about this today because it's so easy to wallow in self-pity. And I have done this plenty in my life. But this what if game of these questions, they will keep you up at night sometimes. And eventually I realized that like that version of reality that might have existed doesn't exist. We only have the version of reality that we're in now, and we'll never know what it could have been. But what if that is a good thing? Right? So like, what if it did go the way that you wanted and you got what you wanted, but then in that version of reality, the very next day you walked out into the street and you got hit by a bus? Like, you would much rather have this life that you have now with things being imperfect than not have one at all. So that's kind of what I wanted to get into today, is that what if works both ways, and that different doesn't always mean better. Theoretically, it could be worse. You know, this is the life you have, and you'll do better to just move forward from here rather than getting caught up in the past or hypotheticals. So I'm curious to hear about things that might not have gone the way you wanted to, or things that you've thought about where you wanted it to go differently, and just kind of explore what might have happened at that point.
The biggest one for me, and stuff that I still think about, is what if I had gone to college?
Yeah, that's a big one for me too.
And I mean, we would be in massive amounts of debt.
Of course.
That's for sure.
That's for sure.
But on the flip side, it's like, I don't think I ever would have gone into finance. That was my way of making, a quote, adult living,
right,
unquote, without the college degree.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe that would have been good. But yeah. I think that I learned a lot of really important lessons through having a job I didn't really care about.
Yeah.
I made important connections. It was cool to know that if I wanted to, I could be in that environment.
Yeah.
I didn't want to ultimately.
Right. But you learn that too. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, you might not have known, and now you know where you want to head more. And it's kind of like we were talking about in one of the other episodes. Sometimes figuring out what you don't want is even more valuable than thinking about things that you do want in life.
Well, I think when you skip college and you go right into the workforce and you're trying to still be as lucrative, mm-hmm, I think you're forced to grow up a lot faster.
Yeah.
I hear most of my friends went to college, and I hear them talking about, all the fun, crazy, like sowing my wild oats times, right, when they're in college. And I never got that.
Right.
And, maybe that's for the best.
Yeah. I am part of an exclusive club. I've actually dropped out of the same community college 2 times back in New Jersey, which, 2 times, that's a big deal.
2 times?
But no, I mean, even though I didn't end up finishing the degree, I did actually learn a lot, because I went for communications and I was, going to be in radio, and here we are doing a podcast. And there's lots of things that I learned back then that have helped, even some of the basic audio production things that I've learned. Like, I like to think all the time that like a lot of the jobs and experiences and things that I've done in my life, even though I didn't stick with them, have given me skills that I use now. Both in my regular life as well as like in my, career work type life too. Like sales, we were both in sales for a long time. Mm-hmm. And now, as somebody who owns a business, that has been very helpful when talking to vendors and customers and people who you may need to like have some kind of a negotiation with. So like, no, things didn't go the way I wanted to with finishing college, but it led to me getting other jobs that gave me other skills that I eventually ended up using, And
there's a way to turn that around if you think hard enough about obviously there are certain exceptions, almost everything in your life, almost every bad time, every bad relationship, every bad whatever, whether it's personal to you or something global. For instance, lockdown with the pandemic. We can all lament the fact that for all intents and purposes, we kind of lost a year.
Yeah.
For somebody who's really into theater, I wasn't able to get on stage really for 2 years because that kind of event did not open back up till 2022.
Right.
Same thing with live music.
Right.
But at the same time, if there was no lockdown, I would not have a dog.
Yeah.
The only reason I went and got that dog was because I knew that I would have the time to be at home with her and to train her.
Right. And Appa's like a huge part of your life now.
She's my baby.
Exactly. And it's like, what would you have done? You know, it's like, there's one example where like different may not necessarily have been better, you know, because like if you didn't go through the lockdown and you didn't go through what you did and figured out that you could have the time for a dog and you didn't have Appa in your life, you would be missing out on so much joy and so much of the fulfillment that you get from being a dog mom,
right,
that you might not have had if things went your way, you know? So that's why I always just kind of think about the fact that different might not have been better. Yeah, I guess it could have been. You know, it's like that Rick and Morty episode. Like, what about the version of reality where Hitler cured cancer? Like, I mean, I guess you just don't think about it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of funny how that works out. Like, you know, what can sound like a small and maybe be a big example is like with college. If I had stuck with college and gotten a job and stayed where I was in New Jersey, where I grew up, like I may not have moved to Rhode Island, you know, the person I was with at the time might have moved to New Jersey, but in the long run, I moved to Rhode Island. Things eventually didn't work out and I met the love of my life. And now I'm married very happily and like have a very good idea of what's going on in our future because I came and did something different. And for a while, I felt like it was not the best decision. You know, when I was going through some tough times, I thought, you know, man, I should have just stayed at home. I should have finished school. I should have done this, but it actually worked out a lot better for me in the long run. So it's like, what if the thing that you thought wasn't really best for your life? What if you thought that was going to be best, but you really have no idea, right?
Right. And you have no way to prove it either way.
Oh yeah.
Which is, you know, if you're somebody that can't stop thinking about it,
Yeah.
maybe do something creative. Write a story about what could have been. And I guarantee you will find yourself missing at least one aspect of your life.
Yeah.
You will find yourself saying, well, all of that sounds great, but I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have the place I'm living. I wouldn't have the person I'm with, whatever.
Yeah. And it's like, people forget that you can't just cherry pick parts of things, you know? So like, if you, for example, wanted to go a different path in your life and wanted to go into college and do something different, you have to take everything that comes along with that, right? I feel like a lot of times we pinpoint one specific thing and we want that thing to have been different. But what if one thing getting better means 10 things get worse? You know, like that's just part of it. Or, you know, I see people who kind of pine over different times in their lives. Like, you know, I'm in my 30s now and I'm really loving it at this point. Who knows what'll happen by the time I'm 40. But for now, I really like this part of my life. But I hear a lot of people think back to like, oh, you know, when I was in my 20s, I just wish I could be back there and have that energy and that freedom and stuff. It's like, yeah, but you know what else you had in your 20s? No fucking money. You know what else you had in your 20s is no like sense of purpose sometimes. Okay. Like I'm generalizing a bit here, but like
early 20s specifically.
Yeah. Like I think back to my 20s and I think like, man, I was stupid. Like my early 20s, I thought that I had it all figured out, but the older I get and the more I learn, the more I realize I have no idea what's going on. And I'm just embracing that now.
To be fair, I think about this morning and I'm like, man, I was stupid. But
this morning,
but it is all part of the embracing the idea that I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm cool with it.
Yeah. And, you know, the name of the show is Fuck the Plan, right? Like we don't necessarily want to stick with the life plan that's been prescribed by society. But at the same time, if you have a plan that you have for your life and you want to pursue that, why would you be, if you're fantasizing about something different, then do something different. You know, we all have the power to make those changes. And I don't want this to be like a totally negative thing and thinking about the past, because think about the future too. You know, another big time that I and a lot of people think about the what if game is like, well, I want to try this, but what if I fail? You know, what if I didn't get to where I wanted to go and now I've wasted time and energy and money? It's like, well, what if you're wrong though? Like, what if you pursue, you know, being a social media personality, or what if you pursue a different career path and you're actually really good at it? And what if you succeed? What if it's better than you could have possibly imagined? You know, like what if things will go the way you want in the future if you try this? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we're not saying, don't think about the past, because thinking about the past, just like, history in a grand sense, can help you in the future. It's my philosophy, usually about like romantic relationships, because God knows I've got quite a resume.
We should do an episode just about that.
Oh, just about the choices we've made. But I look back and think about how miserable I was and why didn't I leave? And, I want to go back and like slap myself in the face. Yeah. But at the same time, there are invaluable lessons that you can take away from even the most harmful of situations.
Yeah. And so like, what if you didn't learn that lesson? And then, the next time you were with someone that's, like your fiance now, like sometimes I think about how if I didn't learn all of those lessons the hard way in previous relationships and in times in my life where I didn't, succeed at things, I wouldn't have been prepared to be the kind of person I needed to be for my current relationship.
Exactly. And he and I talk about that all the time. There's a decent age gap. Yeah. He's like Paul Rudd. So honestly, like I met him and I assumed he was my age. But he and I, even though there's that age gap, the way my parents raised me, I've always related to people who are a little older more than myself. Yeah. And it just so happened that our timelines were very perfectly synced when we met. And we constantly say we met each other at exactly the right time. Yeah. Because all of our past endeavors went poorly, but not necessarily for a bad reason. Right. We are stronger because of it. Like as individuals, we are stronger. We know how to navigate. We've learned how to communicate effectively. Yeah. And we've learned our boundaries, which is so important in every situation you're in, whether it's employment, romance, friendships. It's really invaluable to have boundaries, and that doesn't make you close-minded. Yeah. No, I mean, I think having boundaries is really what helps you navigate these things in life, because like you learn these things over time and you learn like what you do want, what you don't want. And then that kind of informs how you act and how you treat, how you approach, I guess, your relationships and things in life. So if I didn't have some of the experiences that I had and hadn't learned things the hard way, then I would have just failed again. And it's like, you can think back and pinpoint, like you said, your parents raised you to be, in a way that you relate more with folks who are a little older or more mature. But, some people might think back to how they were raised and think like, man, I wish my parents did this different. And that's like a common thing. It's not just, because of your parents, it's because everybody has that experience. But that's one example of pinpointing that one thing. So like if your parents hadn't raised you that way, then you wouldn't have related to your fiance so much, and you might not have been in the right position. And therefore you could have given up something that ultimately is the most impactful and important relationship of your life. Yeah. Because you have to take it all together. You can't just take that one aspect out because it would have changed everything. So you have to accept the good with the bad. And, I think that's a big part of what I'm trying to share here is that like, yes, there are good things. Yes, there are bad things. And you can't have one without the other. So if you want to get rid of these bad experiences that you have, you're also getting rid of the potential for good experiences that you've had and learning experiences. Because I'm always saying that, failing at things is learning. It's even if you fail, that's not a negative thing, I don't think. I think it's a way that you've learned a lesson in life. And saying, oh, well, what if I did this different? What if I did succeed at that and I stayed at my job as a financial advisor? Then we wouldn't be sitting here and making this podcast. Mm-hmm. And go ahead. The lessons that we've learned, they're not things we ever could have learned in college. Oh, no. And they're more important, I think, than a lot of those academic subjects. And, by us not going to college, we got another 4 to 8 years of being out in the real world, so to speak.
And getting experience,
Getting experience. And I think it put us a little ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. But, that being said, it is so hard not to say, well, maybe if I had gone to school for theater, I could be on Broadway right now. Yeah. Or maybe I could just be in massive debt and even less likely to afford a place in New York.
Exactly. And so like that makes me think like, all right, so what if you did stick with college for theater? And then what do you usually do after college? You go and try and find a job in that industry, right? What if you went to school for theater, got your degree, and for the first 5 years afterwards, just miserably failed at trying to get acting jobs because you had zero experience. And then that killed your love of acting and theater. And now all of a sudden you've got 4 years worth of school, 4 years worth of debt that mean absolute shit because you now don't want to act anymore. You know,
my brother had a similar experience. My brother's a fantastic visual artist. Like,
can confirm, I know him.
Yeah, like very, very trippy, unique style. You see something of his and you're like, that's a Chris Caduto original.
It is. We'll put one of them up on the screen at some point.
Yeah, we should. I'll ask him which one he'd like. But when he went to college, he's only a year older than me. So I was finishing my senior year, and he went to the Art Institute in Boston. And he was pretty excited about it at first, but slowly his love of creating was dwindling because it was as if they were trying to hammer the originality out of him.
Yeah.
He was like, okay, they were like, okay, I see what you're doing here, but that's not the proper technique. Let me show you.
Right,
and something like art isn't supposed to be rigid like that.
Yeah.
And it destroyed his love of art. He ended up dropping out, and now, he's back in it, but there was a solid break in between dropping out and when he picked up a paintbrush again.
Yeah. And it's like specifically with art, music, visual art, anything like that. The second that you switch from creating it for art's sake or for your own sake to express yourself, and you start creating it for approval, for the approval of others, even if it's just your parents, even if you just want your friends and family to like it, your art changes. And by creating for approval rather than creating for value or creating for yourself or just the nature of the content, you now are not being as authentic of an artist. So you've killed the one thing that would make you stand out from everybody else by going through with that. And, this kind of brings me to a good point, is that sometimes I like to flip the script from saying what if and replace it with even if. So when I'm thinking about the future, sometimes I'll think, all right, well, like, what if I go to school for art theoretically and I don't like it? I want to be able to say, even if I go to school for art and I don't like it, I'm still going to do something anyways. I'm going to figure out the situation. So like coming up with some kind of like, backup to keep you moving that right direction is so important to me, because there's lots of times where I feel like, or especially when I was first getting started with the ADHD Project and putting content out there for people to see, like a big thing I had to get over is like, what if people don't like me? Like, what if nobody listens to me? What if everybody thinks I'm dumb? And eventually, if you put anything out on social media, you'll learn to realize that everybody is going to think you're dumb, like at a certain point. And I tried to stop myself from thinking that and start thinking, well, like, all right, even if I make this video and I put it out and it gets 5 views, that's 5 people whose day I've impacted. Even if it only gets 100 views, can you imagine 100 people getting something out of something you said? Like if you were in a room, in an auditorium with 100 people and they listened to you talk for a minute, like that is impactful. Like you would feel like you just reached, you're the Lord Jesus with the 7 fishes. You've got the masses out there just waiting to hear, because Easter just passed recently, so of course that was on my mind. But
of course,
why not? But like, if you stood in front of a room with 100 people in it and you got to speak to them and they all heard your story and it impacted them in a way, you would be thrilled. So if you put it in the context of social media and you're now disappointed that 100 people liked what you said, it's like you're creating for approval. You're not creating for creation's sake.
Social media has done a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think social media is a huge cause of the what if game now. It's, the images are harmful from these, influencers.
A lot of times, yeah.
I say that with derision because, come on, it's not a real job. But, the influencers out there who are promoting these unrealistic body standards, and you have these people, usually women, sitting back thinking, well, what if I had gone to the gym today? What if I had done this? What if I hadn't eaten? And all these really harmful things you eat, or even on a much lesser scale, you're seeing your friends on social media, and you're seeing this person got promoted, this person got married, this person just had a baby, whatever. And, you're comparing your life with all of your, DVD special features with other people's highlight reel. And it's a false equivalency. It's not right, but you can't necessarily help yourself from going down
Sometimes,
that
yeah.
what if.
Yeah, or
because
the
you want to know why you aren't where they are.
Yeah, it's like the cousin question, like the if only. You know, like if only I was like this, if only I had this body or that thing. And you get caught up too much thinking about like, you know, what could be or what could happen without realizing that you have the power to change things and make things happen for your own life. And it's your own happiness that you should be concerned about, not that of others. You know, we all only put out what is going to be, what we think people will like on social media. And a lot of times I try and focus on not doing that. And like, for example, when, you know, I would hate to call myself an influencer. I rather would call myself somebody who's like an advocate for others with ADHD, because I don't go out there and say like, you know, I'm very selective about the things that I promote. Like people reach out to me all the time. They're like, oh, hey, promote our, you know, dishwasher, or like, you know, like random, it's the most random stuff, you know, that, hey, we're a household products company on TikTok. Would you want to promote our laundry baskets? Like, no, like what the hell?
There's no connection between what you're doing and that.
Exactly.
And that's what I mean by influencers, the paid product sellers.
Exactly. But like, as someone who kind of is on social media and wants to advocate for others with ADHD and help you, the more I think about my content, I just think about, what can I do that will add value to people's lives? And like, what can I do that's going to give somebody something without expecting anything in return? And if you do feel like you want to give something in return, buy a planner. But otherwise, you know, like I want to give value to people more than I take from things. And so many times when you see people on social media, it's all about take, give me this, buy that. It's not about giving value to others. So like when I record TikTok videos or any kind of video, when I'm talking to the camera, I visualize as if it's like Cass or one of my friends sitting across the table from me. And I act as if I'm talking to that person directly, rather than I'm talking to like the millions of people that may or may not have any interest in what I'm saying. And like, you try and personalize it a little bit to be like, all right, well, I don't want to put this out there in a way that looks fake. I want to be authentic to people, because I don't want people to see my content and think like, oh man, if only I could be that guy. I want people to see my content and be like, wow, that guy's a dope and he figured it out anyways. Like, you know, take my example of like not having any clue what I'm doing. Like there's a shirt I wear sometimes on videos that says I have no idea what I'm doing, and realize that we all are just out here trying to figure this shit out as we go. You know, like nobody has any idea how it's gonna shake out. It's like that line from Wolf of Wall Street where Matthew McConaughey's character is like, look, absolutely nobody in the world knows whether stocks are going to go up or down, least of which stockbrokers. You know, like absolutely nobody has any idea. So why worry about comparing if you can just accept the fact that nobody knows? Nobody has any idea what's going on. We are all out here just fumbling our way through things and trying to figure it out. And if anybody else can do it, so can you. Like every single item that's sitting around you right now, from this microphone to the stand to my computer and that coffee cup, was all dreamt up by somebody who's no smarter than you. You know, they just learned things differently and applied things differently in their lives. So there's no reason you can't do that too.
Right. Along the finance of Wolf of Wall Street, this, I think, is just it's a funny anecdote, but it's also very, I think, relevant to the way that we think about this, or the way that we should be thinking about this. Is I forget when this happened, and I'm sure you've heard about this too. Forgot when this happened. It was maybe early 2000s, maybe 2010s. Some like professional portfolio managers were, doing their thing, and somebody else in the industry said, I'm going to have my cat pick the stocks in my portfolio.
Yes.
And they wrote out the names of stocks, and then like whatever the cat went for, they threw it in their portfolio.
Yeah.
And then at the end of, maybe it was like the quarter, I forget the time period, they measured the cat's portfolio with those of the managers, and the cat did a better job.
Look at that. I should get Lily over here and have my cat start picking stuff out.
It's a very solid example that there are things that are just beyond your control. No matter how prepared, no matter how educated you are, you can't control everything.
Yeah.
And you can be the most prepared human being in the world. Things are going to happen that you cannot predict, that you cannot control. And yeah, it sounds so easy to be like, so just don't worry about it. Obviously, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But when you get into those moments of panic, of these moments of false nostalgia for times that honestly really weren't as good as we are making them seem in our head, you can remember something like that and try to logic your way back down to earth and think, well, these people who get paid billions of dollars to put portfolios together got beaten by a cat. Like, maybe it's not that I'm not good enough, that I'm not smart enough. It's just the world is chaos.
Right.
And it's not my fault.
Yeah. I mean, chaos is kind of the default state, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of what we do in our lives is to try and bring order to things, and things that are naturally have no order, things that we need to try and put some sort of patterns in place.
Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park with the chaos theory.
Exactly.
He wasn't wrong.
No, not at all. And it's like, what I'm talking about here is like, I'm not saying that everybody's just going to stop doing this tomorrow, because it's not realistic, but trying to build the mindset of even if, or like, even if that happened, it still might not have gone the way I wanted. Or even if this bad thing does happen in the future, I could still be okay, and I will still be okay. And changing from a closed or from like a false question that you can't really get an answer to, which is what if, to something that does have a defined answer of even if. Like, even if this happened, I could still be all right. You know, that's real and realistic. Whereas saying, what if this happens and it doesn't go right, that's imaginary at this point, because you don't really know, and learning to build the mindset of, I'm going to handle it no matter what happens or which way it shakes out, gives you the confidence to try things and move forward. And in the context of this show, where we're talking about trying to build a life for yourself that is more aligned with what you want and makes you enjoy your life, like, think about, all right, well, what if things did go that way, and then you hated every second of your life? Are you loving a life now where you're struggling, and would you rather hate a life where you're succeeding? There's plenty of people who have success and it doesn't make them happy. And there's plenty of people who are happy whether or not they have success, and it's all about the way that we define things in our lives. We don't necessarily need to tie things to results. And in case nobody told you, there's no rules to this. You could do whatever you want. You could theoretically, if you're happy with, what you're doing now, then you might not need to make a change. But if you're unhappy and you're worried about doing something different, making you less happy, it's like, dude, you're already miserable now. What do you have to lose? You either have a 100% chance of staying miserable, or like probably a 50-50, 60-40 shot of maybe not being miserable. And if you are, then guess what? That's where you were anyways,
Yeah. In the end, it's all about trying to dispense expectations, or dispense with expectations. Which is, again, not easy to do. But being so dead set on something going one way, you might want something desperately right now.
Yeah.
And in 6 months, you're going to be like, why did I want this?
Yeah. Especially with ADHD,
so much effort into this.
We change things so very often,
Yes. And I don't know if this is my bipolar disorder or the ADHD. Shout out to episode 2. But I find myself, I'll get this idea. And then all of a sudden, it's all I can do for the next 6 hours is plan this idea. I'm going to tell everybody I know about this idea. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Oh, here I am going to drop a bunch of money on getting this started.
Yeah.
And then in a week, I'm like, I don't want to do this. and it's not helpful. And, then I can say, well, what if I didn't drop that money? Well, that probably would have gone better for me, but there's nothing I can do about it now.
Yeah. Well, even though you dropped the money, now you've learned that wasn't the right thing.
To stop being so impulsive.
Yeah. I've been trying to learn to let things marinate a little bit before we're jumping in, or like dip a toe in the water or put a foot in. And like, one way that you can start to challenge these sort of like limitations that you put on yourself is like testing things with a cheap bet. And I heard this on like some TikTok I was watching, but like, there's almost nothing I do that I don't test with a cheap bet first. So like, if I want to, like here's a silly example. Like, if I wanted to become a race car driver, I could go and spend $10 million on a race car and a team of people to run it, and then get in the car and realize like, oh, I'm no good at this. Or you can go and spend $20 and do a go-kart race over the weekend. And like, if you do that and you like it, then all right, maybe you go to the next step. And I know that's a very silly example, but it's to illustrate the point of like, you can start small and test things out with a cheap bet. Don't go in and drop $500 on the most badass kitchen equipment that you can buy if you've never cooked anything before. Go spend $20 on something halfway decent, try it, and then see if you want to continue pursuing it,
Yep. And I'm laughing because I'm just like, so true.
Things you might have learned the hard way.
Yeah. I think we mentioned in one of the previous episodes, you and I have a habit of learning things the hard way, which is better than not learning them at all.
That's true. Yeah.
And it is so hard to see in the moment. And, with time, everything softens a little bit. What did South Park say? In 22.2 years after an event, everything can be funny.
Yes.
But it's something that I try to do. Like, humor is a huge coping mechanism for me. And honestly, it can be a little alarming to people who don't know me.
Right.
When I so casually joke about things that maybe they don't understand why I'm joking about.
I'm thinking about times where like you and I have joked about like your suicide attempts and things like that. And I'm just like, I get it. Cause it's you and I, and we've had this, friendship for a long time. But like, if we were standing in a bar and somebody who didn't know us heard that conversation happening where we're like talking openly about our mental health struggles and making light of it, then like they would probably be a little bit disturbed.
I made a joke like that the other day to my fiance, and he's like, I never know whether to laugh or give you a hug when you make these jokes. And I'm like, a little bit of both, honestly.
Try
it's
both.
Fine.
Try both.
Both is good.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, hey, what if, like, to go back to the theme of the episode, like the what if game here, what if you didn't fail at those attempts and you weren't here? You know what I mean?
That is one in particular that I think about quite a bit.
Yeah.
And given the play that I wrote, which is all about suicide and mental health. For instance, when we had our first show, which was like April of 2022, I had so many people coming up to me, hugging me, talking to me as if we had been friends for years.
Yeah.
Telling me about their attempts, about the attempts or the successful suicides of people that they knew.
Yeah.
I had one person tell me, and this was during the October run, tell me that he worked as a 911 operator and would hear all of these stories about people found, overdosed or whatever. And he got incredibly desensitized and like, as you would, taking those calls multiple times a day. And he was like, seeing this show has reawakened my compassion for these, because now I'm seeing it from the other side.
Yeah.
And it's something I started I got actual letters in the mail and emails. I'm still getting things like that.
Yeah.
And when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I had to go through something that was a traumatic event.
Yeah.
If you try to kill yourself and you survive, it is traumatic on so many levels.
Oh, yeah.
And with that, I'm like, if I had to go through that trauma, I'm almost grateful for it, because, and this isn't, me being arrogant, this is me being confident. I know that I have the people skills and the oration skills and the writing skills to turn that trauma into something productive.
Right.
And I was able to help all of these people, whether it was come to terms with the loss of someone they loved or to just feel less alone.
Yeah.
And if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't gone through that trauma, I would not have been able to help these people.
Yeah. And it's like hugely impactful and powerful for people's lives. Is like, you don't realize that these negative situations, even though they didn't turn out the way you wanted, really did lead to a lot of positive interactions. And like, what if you had succeeded and you weren't here? Forget about the podcast, forget about just, your friends and things like that. But think about the impact that you've made on people's lives having gone through that. And now other people may have their own what if of like, well, what if I did actually go through with that? Maybe I'm not going to now. They might have seen your play and all of a sudden realized that the what if game isn't worthwhile, to follow.
Yeah. And it's why it was hard at first to talk about it openly. And now it's like, yeah, that's right. I tried to kill myself. It's a fact.
Yeah.
Like, it's not some theory. It's not an opinion that somebody can correct me on. It happened.
Yeah.
And if I have the ability to talk about it and somebody overhears, or somebody watching this is hearing this, it's a way of destigmatizing these things. And maybe hearing somebody confidently talking about it, somebody who can joke about it, somebody who's had perspective, somebody who wants to help people, you can feel more confident in trying to get help.
Yeah.
You can be like, okay, you know what? It's not something that I have to be ashamed of. Maybe I'm going to open up and talk to my family about this.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm going to try and find a therapist.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll stop lying to my therapist. A lot of people get therapists and then are ashamed
to
of like
talk to
being
them.
judged, and they bend the truth. And that's a big thing too. And it's like, you know, what if I didn't hear this person talk about this?
Or, you know, another one for even if it's like, even if you're at the point in your life where you feel like you don't want to be here anymore, you still have value in your life and you still can go on to do things that help other people. You know, even if you don't feel like you have anything to add to society anymore, if you feel like you would be better off gone, you're not. You know, even if you are at the point where you feel like you have zero to give, you can recover from that and you can get to the point where you are feeling more, you know, I don't want to say like feeling more like a human or feeling more valuable, because it's not like that, but you can get to a point where you're not feeling like you don't want to be here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, even if you feel suicidal, you can eventually turn that into a positive experience for someone else's life. Even though you had to go through that negative experience, now that shapes a lot of the things that you do, and you have this profound perspective that a lot of folks don't, especially folks who haven't been through that. And there's so many people whose lives you've positively impacted now because of that negative experience that you went into. And so it goes back to like, even if I don't want to be on this planet anymore, there still is hope for not only a happy, but a fulfilling life, and a life where you can help other people in a positive way, learn from their experiences too, you know?
Yeah. And like with any mental illness, ADHD included, you know, the symptoms don't just stop.
Yeah.
Even with proper treatment, even when you're in a state of quote unquote recovery, recovery is not a linear path.
Right.
You'll still have days where you think about it, but you know, in my opinion, if you have more days where you are happy waking up than you do not, you're doing pretty well.
And even if you don't have more days where you're happy waking up than you're not, you can still get there.
Yes.
And you can still make progress, because really the only thing that matters, I think, in this life is making progress. It's hard to put closed-ended goals on things that should be open-ended, but people do it all the time. You know, you might have a goal of like, all right, well, if I don't get to XYZ thing, then there's no point in life. But what if it was just around the corner? You know, to go back to the what if game. Exactly. It's like, you know, if you want to give up, what if the very next day, you know, you're about to win the lottery? Or, you know, I know it's a silly example, and like, I'm not comparing, you know, wanting to end your life to winning the lottery. You know, it's, but at the same time, like, say you're working towards something, you're trying to learn a skill, you're trying to, you know, build a podcast, you're trying to do something that makes you more fulfilled, whether or not it has economic value. You might feel like you want to give up, but you could be 2 steps away from turning the corner and getting to, you know, something profound for you. You know, like there was definitely a point where I felt like, oh, well, you know, maybe this posting on social media thing isn't really for me, but I stuck with it. And within a month's time, you know, you'd have a video go viral or something blows up, and all of a sudden, like, you're starting to get results. And it's like you said, recovery and success and things are not linear. You know, people expect it to just be like a straight upward trajectory, but in reality, it's flat for a long time. And then all of a sudden there's like one big upshoot towards the end. And then it becomes more linear from there. You know, you have to be able to stick through and push through those difficult times, and asking yourself, you know, well, what if I fail? Like, what if you don't, you know, or even if you do fail, that could help you, you know, think of a way that might help you learn something that's going to keep you from failing at a different endeavor that might even be more important for you, for your life.
I think a really kind of concise way to think about this productively is not to ask, well, what if I didn't do this? What if I did this? Whatever. It's to say, am I better off now than I was X amount of years ago?
Yeah.
If you say no, you think about why, what it is you want, and how you might be able to change that.
Right.
If you say yes, all of those what ifs don't matter.
Yeah. Absolutely, because that version of reality doesn't exist. What about the version of reality where Hitler cured cancer, to quote Rick and Morty again? It doesn't exist. So who knows?
Yeah.
You know, but what does exist is the life that you have now. And you always, from here on out, have the opportunity to change direction and move things. You know, if you are, I've said this a billion times on, you know, across, I can't even tell you where I've said it because I've probably posted it on every platform. But like, just because things could be different doesn't mean that they're going to be better. And just because things could have been better doesn't mean that what you have now is not worth it.
Right. And there is no floor or ceiling for these things. Things can always be better. Things can always be worse.
Yeah.
And which makes worrying about it even more useless because it can go either way. You can't say there is no real rock bottom. Yeah. You can keep going down.
Oh, I can go lower.
Oh, I can go.
I hope everybody's picking up on all of our subtle Always Sunny references throughout the show. But.
And if they're not, I hope you go home and you watch the show and then you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, you know, it's like you said, it can always go up. It can always go down. You know, I remind myself all the time, like, this too shall pass, both when it's bad and when you feel like you're on top of the world, because that will pass too at some point, you know? And, you know, I've struggled with anxiety a lot in my life. And I know there's a lot of people out there who say like, well, I can't stop my brain from doing the spiral and getting into the what if thing. And like, I understand that. Like, it doesn't mean that this is just going to go away. But, you know, think for a moment, if you can try and redirect some of that and interrupt that thought pattern, like, you know, my therapist tells me to do, you know, interrupt the thought pattern of the negative spiral with, you know, a positive what if. Like, all right, well, what if it doesn't happen? What if things are fine? What if I spend a month basically eating myself alive over this, and then it means nothing in the end because it didn't happen, you know?
Yeah, and it's not about stopping this from happening with your brain, because that's unreasonable.
Brains. Yeah.
Yeah. But it is about trying to stop it, trying to talk yourself down from it, showing yourself a little bit of compassion so that you don't totally spiral out.
Yeah.
You can talk yourself out of it, give yourself a safety net. That's the most reasonable, feasible goal with this kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's a practice, you know, it's not something that you do once and it's done. It's something that you have to consistently practice every day, and you get better at it over time. Like, things are not easy at first, and almost nothing is. If it was, it wouldn't be worthwhile. But like, over time, we can learn to train ourselves, our brains and our thought patterns towards these sort of more positive outlooks. And it's not like just thinking positively will solve all your problems, but if you can start to practice some of these things more, you will be more inclined to do that, even just as a habit, than to let things spiral negatively. And yes, there's a clinical element to this. I understand you're not going to get rid of all of your anxious thoughts just by thinking about it differently. But at the same time, you've got to use some sort of strategy and technique to try and work with it and work against it. And at the end of the day, I really just want everyone to start thinking more about even if, you know, rather than what if. Like, all right, even if this bad thing happens, I will still be okay. Even if I fail at it, I can still learn from it.
And I think, yeah, you know, positive thinking, it's not going to solve your problem, but it's probably going to stop you from creating some.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can at least not actively be creating problems for yourself, that's a win, I think. Absolutely. So, I mean, those are kind of my closing thoughts on it, is that, like, you know, what I really want you to try and get out of this is, when you get those what ifs, you know, think about two things. One, all right, well, what if you had everything you wanted and it wasn't really what you wanted? And also, you know, on the negative side of things, like, think, all right, well, even if this bad thing happens, I can still be okay and I can still get through it. This has been Fuck the Plan. I'm Aaron.
I'm Cass.
We'll see y'all next time.